Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us here on this rare but happily rainy Monday across the Front Range throughout much of eastern Colorado. I'm meteorologist Chris Bianchi here in the 9 News Weather Center, and joining us now in his North Arvada Bureau is our very own meteorologist, storm chaser, meteorologist extraordinaire, Cory Reppenhagen, for a bit of a look back in terms of what was a wildly dry and snowless, at least for the Denver area, April, as well as a look back on what was a pretty kind of crazy day yesterday in terms of weather. And Cory, I know you were on a storm chase. We're going to actually show some of the video from your storm chase, as well as talk to you a little bit about that. And then also talk a little bit about today's rain and look forward for, hopefully, fingers crossed, some signs of more moisture in the weeks to come, and maybe, Cory, getting you out of that north in the next couple of weeks. But Cory, first of all, thanks so much for joining us here on this, again, happily rainy Monday.
Yeah, man. Glad to be here with you once again, discussing some cool weather topics. And yeah, every time we see a pattern flip like this, you hope that it can just kind of stick around for a little while.
Yeah, certainly do, and a bit promising this week, maybe even early next week as well. We'll touch on that in a little bit, but Cory, kind of want to start things off by taking a look back at what was a pretty weird April. I mean, certainly for the Front Range, the mountains did get their snow-ish, but along the Front Range, we were completely skunked from precipitation. Denver, at the last second, getting 0.05 of an inch of rainfall to avoid the dubious honor of least the driest April on record, but Denver with its third driest April on record with 0.06 of an inch of rainfall all of last month. No snow for the first time in the month of April in Denver in 20 years. What are your top takeaways from that month? Is it more how exceptionally dry and windy it was, or the snowless pattern? What was your kind of number one takeaway from a very weird April in terms of Front Range weather?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, that last little bit of rain there at the end, I kind of liken that to getting a home run in the top of the ninth to only lose 15-1 instead of 15-0. So it is just a frightening month altogether. And I think the wind obviously was top of mind. And you have, plenty of stats that you've been throwing out there about just how unusually windy it was. But I think what the reason why it kind of stuck out as windy is because it wasn't accompanied by a traditional storm. When it's snowing, we expect there to be wind, and it's just part of it. But when it's just wind, we notice it. When it's with a blizzard, we expect there to be wind. But when there is no blizzard, there is no snow, all there is dry wind. We notice it. And so I think that was a huge, huge impact. And the wind had way more impact than I think just us being annoyed to the bejesus with it. I mean, because everybody was. But the wind is also a drying factor, and I think the wind made a dry month even drier, helping to evaporate some of the soil moisture. And the wind direction was almost all had a westerly component over it, which means it was coming over the mountains, and those are downsloping winds for us here on the Front Range, living in the rain shadow. And so our temperatures were a little bit warmer some days. I think that really, really windy, really bad fire weather day, I think it got up to 89, partially because of those downsloping winds. So it was a combination of not just precipitation deficit, but high evaporation rates from warm temperatures and the wind as well. So just really, really happy to get rid of that month.
Absolutely. I think we all are. And by the way, one way to kind of reference what you're saying about how anomalously dry it was, something we were looking at last time you were in the office a couple weeks ago, where dew point temperatures in Denver along the Front Range were by far their lowest over the month of April. Those records only go back, I believe, to the early 80s, but it was so anomalously dry in terms of dew point. The lower the dew point, the kind of generally speaking, lower the moisture there is. Those dew points, Cory, were so low all month long here in the Denver area. And I think it goes to what you were saying. It wasn't just the fact that the wind was annoying, but the wind was bringing those dry downsloping winds and actually making it drier than even the lack of precipitation and those warm temperatures would tell you it was.
Yeah, and those dew point temperatures, they're for an entire 24-hour period. So that's nighttime hours included. And that's
Mm-hmm.
another, like when you're talking about the drought, there's so many factors that go into that other than just a below average precipitation. It's that moisture recovery that should happen overnight because of the dew points and the humidity rises overnight just it wasn't happening. So that's another thing on top of the wind and on top of the heat and top of the deficit that it was just normally I really love April. It's like baseball starting. You start to think about severe weather. There's so many great things about April, but not this time, man. Goodbye.
Well, goodbye to April. Hello to hopefully a wetter May and maybe a good early sign here with the first 2 days of the month, overproducing a little bit. I guess before we kind of get into the near-term pattern, your storm chase yesterday, I kind of want to ask you about how you think this summer is shaping up. And I guess a secondary question to that is, do we still have time to make up for a lack of moisture in April? So, for example, if we get a wet May and June, but we had this really dry April, how does that affect things for this upcoming summer?
Well, I mean, if you asked me 3 days ago, I would have been a lot more pessimistic. Obviously, the first day of May helps a lot, but when you look at the long term outlook, just temperature, dew points, humidity, everything is kind of a little bit against us. I think the climate prediction center has half of Colorado, the northern half, kind of in equal chances almost at getting average temperature and precipitation for May, and then that kind of goes downhill in the summer with the heat and the dry air. So I don't. The dew points really do worry me. The humidity just worries me because when you don't get the recovery, moisture recovery at night, because when you look at a place like the Front Range of Colorado, we don't get a lot of precipitation anyways. If you're talking about only getting 9 inches as opposed to 14, it's not a huge deficit, right? I mean, just a few inches of precipitation. So you start to look really heavily at those other factors um, like the humidity recovery at night, the above average temperatures, the wind, these other things that play into our drought issues. And it kind of, you got to just kind of look beyond precipitation. I mean, I'm always hoping that we get a bunch of rain, but even if we get average rain, and by the way, May and June are two of our wettest months. So that's when a deficit could really hurt us. You know, you go 50% less below average in December, and you're taking an average of zero point 0.4 inches of precipitation to zero point 0.2, not big. But in May, if you have 2 inches on average and you take 50% of that, that's a full inch. So it's really good, and it's really important that we got that first almost full inch already, and it's only the second day of.
Absolutely. That is certainly a great sign, Cory. And hopefully we get a bit more on Wednesday, maybe early next week. And part of that inch of rain was accompanied by some thunderstorms, including one, Cory. You were on what looked to be a pretty wild looking storm chase. You were on a storm, I believe it was in Prowers County near Lamar, and a tornado warned storm that was also at the site of an active wildfire. I mean, I know you've chased a lot of storms over the years. I know we've got some video from this as well. But, Cory, what was that like, seeing that storm?
Yeah, it was really really strange. I always say that every storm chase is kind of unique and shows you something that you've never seen before. But this is definitely a first where honestly it was just so between the dust being pulled up by these storms, incredible amount of dust everywhere. You're seeing this is actually a wildfire that was burning just east of Lamar, and to have all that wildfire smoke and all that dust in the air, it almost made it very difficult to actually see the storm structure, and it made everything more chaotic and unorganized. And when that first tornado warning was issued, it was not really a traditional tornado setup where you're looking at the base of the storms kind of starting to lower and circulate. It was more of a high based circulation with just a massive swirl of dust on the ground. And when it was pulling that up, and even this wildfire smoke was getting pulled up into it as well, it was not anything traditional about that day at all. And this wildfire here was one that was in the actually the tornado warned storm went right over top of it, and I was right there when it was happening, and just to calculate in your mind, okay, I'm inside a tornado warned storm, and there's this wildland fire that's burning, is just kind of mind boggling, a little baffling, something that I've never really experienced before. And this fire actually started before the storms came. So this wasn't a lightning start. I saw several other lightning starts in Prowers County during that storm, and that which they got out fairly quickly. But this one was a larger one that started before the storms came over. And then there was the one that was out on the eastern side of Prowers County near Holly, which I don't believe was a lightning strike either, because that kind of started before the storms rolled through as well. So it's strange intermixing between tornado warned storms and wildland prairie fires. Just a little insane.
Yeah, again, I mean, I know you just said it. It's just stunning to me to get those two things kind of overlapping. It's a weird Venn diagram to have an active wildland fire with a tornado warned storm, but I guess so it has been here in Colorado so far this year. That said, again, maybe focusing a bit more optimistically. Today we get the rain, as you mentioned, almost an inch of rain here in Denver. I believe last checkpoint, 9 inches at DIA. Lesser along and west of I-25, but still overall beneficial rain event. How much does this matter? How much does this count in terms of reducing wildfire danger, maybe for the next, maybe even over the next few weeks?
Yeah, well, with it, the wildfire danger part of it is very interesting, because when we're talking about the Front Range and the Eastern Plains, we're highly focused on those 1 hour fuels. So
Mm-hmm.
if we have one dry day, we're right back where we started, square one with wildfire danger. But then it really does help the larger fuels where the trees are going to soak this up. But I think the biggest impact might be to the drought overall, because when we look at the drought, one of the biggest parts of that formula is this long-term precipitation deficit. 1 inch of rain in one day is not going to really impact that long-term deficit that much. But there's a couple of things that kind of stick out in my mind with this storm that will help drought wise. One is the coverage, all right, because if you look at the
Mm.
precipitation analysis for that, yeah, for that storm all through Sunday evening and into this morning, it covered almost 75% of the state. So that's significant, where 75% of the state of Colorado can get measurable precipitation out of one storm. It's kind of like a winter scenario, and we're getting into the time of year where we can have scattered thunderstorms that drop an inch of water, but on a very small area, and you might only get 10 to 20% of the state covered by thunderstorms. So we're running out of those big synoptic scale winter type storms that just bring a lot
Mm.
of coverage. So I think the coverage very significant, especially the northeast part of Colorado, which we saw the drought kind of expand back into the D2, the severe levels over the last 14 days. So that's really significant. And then another part of the storm is just the duration, which kind of couples right into that more synoptic scale, wintry type setup. Because if you look at it, some parts of the Denver metro area got rain, either rain or snow, from 11 o'clock last night to 11 o'clock this morning. That's 12 hours of precipitation. So you're like, that's more like a winter storm,
Hmm.
where you can kind of get that. And the reason why that's important is because when you get that slow, full duration of precipitation, the soil has an opportunity to soak in all that moisture. And so all around that 75% coverage that we saw, that water is going directly into the ground right there. Whereas, when we get a thunderstorm, it gets, you get an inch of rain in 20, 30 minutes, but it hits the ground so fast that it runs off the topsoil, and that really the location where it fell doesn't have an opportunity to soak it in. It's just that spot where it all runs down. So just to have this more of a large scale wintry type of a setup, I think is really important. Just the duration and the coverage of this storm.
Great news, no doubt about it. And I guess my final big question for you, Cory, is looking ahead. Wednesday looks like we get some moisture, probably not as much as today's, but we get some more back in the picture before a dry weekend, perhaps some higher fire danger this weekend before maybe another storm early next week. I guess overall, especially considering how dry and quiet last month was, are you a bit more optimistic, auspicious about the upcoming couple of storms potentially headed our way?
I'm much more optimistic now. I mean, it's not like they came out of nowhere, but when you have the first one kind of overperform in a lot of areas,
Mm-hmm.
where there wasn't a lot of areas forecast to get more than a half inch, and to have almost the entire east side of the Denver metro get between, I mean, a half inch and almost an inch and a half is just really spectacular. Over here in the North Arvada Bureau, we didn't quite get as much, but and we're talking about. I think since I took the measurement this morning, we got another tenth, so we're up to about a quarter inch of moisture. So still pretty significant. And then if
Counts.
we get yeah, if we get a little bit, at least a front, and then maybe a brief period of upslope with the Wednesday one on Wednesday morning, and then you just kind of cross your fingers, and what the one coming up on the weekend kind of looks like is very similar to the one that just passed, where we could get a long duration rain event and covering a large area. So one more of those more wintry type storms before we get into the scattered thunderstorm stuff, which then we'll be having this discussion on your uh, on your 9 News watch here about how I didn't get my thunderstorm. One person got it. That's it. And then 98% of us are sitting there going, "What rain? I didn't get any rain." So we'll get we'll get into that stuff soon enough.
Well, hopefully less hit or miss with this upcoming series of storms and more hits because this past storm, as you mentioned, this one was an overperformer, and that's hopefully a great sign. And if I recall, start of the year, we started the year with an overperformer on New Year's Eve in terms of the snowstorm. That kind of led to a pattern of about 3 months of continuous snow events that seemed to regularly overperform as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that makes me smile. I mean, because you never really know. Like, weather patterns are actually kind of difficult to change. Once they kind of get rolling, it takes a lot of effort to kind of get them to change. But when they do, you don't really know how long that's going to last. A lot of times it's not just, an anomaly flip one day and then we're back into 3 months of dry, but the fact that we had that little kickstart to start off January, and then it was followed by about 2.5 months of really great moisture. I think there's good hope in that.
Let's take the optimistic view on things. But in the meantime, we know that you'll be out in the thick of it if there is active weather, and hopefully there will be more. And so, Cory, but really more important, thanks for taking a look back on what was a weird and dry and kind of dangerous April, and also reliving your interesting chase yesterday and taking a look at the upcoming pattern. Thanks so much, Cory. Appreciate a few minutes of your time here.
Thank you, brother. We'll talk to you anytime, man. And hopefully we do have, well, we know there will be plenty more interesting weather to talk about.
There's always interesting weather. Hopefully, it's more wet and stormy weather rather than what we saw last month, which was interesting, but for probably more of the wrong reasons. But again, thanks so much, Cory, for joining us here on 9 News Plus. We appreciate it, man.
Yeah, man. Take care.
See ya.